Observations with Robert Meyer Burnett.
Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of sci-fi and cinema, your evangelist of the imagination, and that nebulous thing, your existential Mr. Rogers, me, Robert Meyer Burnett. And once again, I'm, of course, Robcasting at you imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community. This is Robservations, the show about something. Robservations, episode number 724. And you know what? There are certain days, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, gentle beings, kind souls, however you identify across these, the 28 known galaxies, there are days when it is a wonderful, glorious day to call yourself an imagination connoisseur. And today is one of those days, obviously, for obvious reasons. It is because the new trailer for Dune, Denis Villeneuve's adaptation of Frank Herbert's seminal science fiction novel Dune, dropped today on the heels of last night's almost hour-long special IMAX presentation of the film that had behind-the-scenes footage, scenes from Dune, and, of course, the trailer itself. And the lovely and Zephyr Chan, who's becoming one of my new favorite people on this channel, they both found themselves seeing this presentation in IMAX, and I had them on the Midnighter last night, so if you want to hear their first impressions about everything that was shown, I invite you all to go back and watch last night's Midnighter, at least the first hour. It's very nice to talk to very intelligent people about very intelligent things, and I think their commentary is certainly worth revisiting. If you watched it, watch it again, and if you haven't seen it, well, you should watch it, because both of these ladies had some tremendous insight that made me, let's just say, I mean, you know, I've been known to have women make my heart rate go up. But this made my heart rate go up in a different kind of a way, in an excitement. They made my excitement level off the charts. Now, to be honest, to me, my personal history with Dune is that Dune was always one of the cornerstones of the canon of great sci-fi literary works. And I've talked a lot about on the show how I don't think you can truly be a fan of science fiction, fantasy, or horror without a working knowledge of the canonical literature of the genre. Like, for instance, I believe it's essential. You have to read Lord of the Rings. I mean, if you really want to understand, because obviously science fiction, fantasy, and horror are literary-based genres. Now, we're all consumers of media, television, movies, comics, video games, however we're getting our science fiction, fantasy, and horror. But the ideas behind all of it are literary ideas. I mean, horror, go all the way back. I mean, how far you want to go back, but like for the modern age, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, you know, or Bram Stoker's Dracula. These are sort of, to me, those are canonical works of literature that your understanding of horror is better off if you've read those works. And I feel that in order to be a great science fiction fan, like when I was a kid, I watched a lot of Star Trek. I mean, it was my favorite thing, but I also watched The Twilight Zone and, of course, The Outer Limits. And one of the things that you noticed, even as a kid, was I started to see the same names pop up on these shows. Whether it was Harlan Ellison in Outer Limits or Star Trek, or other people like Jerome Bixby or George Clayton Johnson, co-writer of Logan's Run, who wrote Star Trek and Twilight Zone. These people were popping up because they were also literary figures. They were writing books, short stories, and novels, and they also wrote teleplays. And Roddenberry actively sought out science fiction writers to write for Star Trek. And, of course, Twilight Zone, you had Charles Beaumont, one of the great fantasists of the mid-20th century, and people like Richard Matheson and Rod Serling himself. I mean, the kind of writing that was going on was very important. But you couldn't be a fan of the Twilight Zone and the Outer Limits and Star Trek and not eventually be led back to books, because I mean, I guess at least maybe that is an elitist supposition on my part, but as a kid, once I realized that there was more to be had, I was like, you mean I could get stories like these in book form? Well, when I was 10 years old, and I probably got it from the inside of a James Blish, either a James Blish Star Trek adaptation when he would adapt these episodes, or Ballantine, the books that when they released the Alan Dean Foster adaptations of the animated series, somehow I got an ad for the Sci-Fi Book Club, and it seemed like for like $4.99 or $3.99 you could get 4 books or something. And I remember going to my parents. I was 10. Actually, I was 9. I wasn't 10 yet because that happened at the end of the year. It was a big deal for me in the 4th grade. Or no, it was probably after Star Wars. I don't know. It was when I was 10, 9 or 10, but it was my 4th grade year. My parents enrolled me in the Sci-Fi Book Club. And one of the things, I mean, that's where I first got my taste of Asimov's Foundation trilogy. And that's where I first really, Dune, that's where I got Dune. Now, I got Dune, I got the first 3 Dune books. I want to say it came like it was a special offer. You got Dune, Dune Messiah, and Children of Dune. So those came, but I didn't read them for a couple more years. I think I waited, it was like, I want to say I was 11 or 12 before I tackled Dune, because I had worked my way up. I'd become, by then, I was getting science fiction books, Robert Heinlein's Stranger in a Strange Land. And I started reading these authors, Arthur C. Clarke. I remember getting Imperial Earth because I thought the cover looked cool. Or Hal Clement's, Phases of, was it Mission of Gravity? Mission of Gravity? Phases of Gravity is Dan Simmons. But I started reading a lot of science fiction. And one of the things about science fiction was the concepts were, to me, mind-blowing. And it was, I always saw science fiction as being confrontational. And it was confrontational in the sense that it took what you knew and it either exploded it or extrapolated upon it, or it was challenging work. And I remember, when you were reading stories, you would come across concepts that were a bit hard to grasp, whether transhumanism or certain artificial intelligence and things like the age and the size of the universe. I remember trying to wrap my head around it. But it was something that I always felt like, my God, I wanted to see these movies. I remember reading the Foundation. At the time, it was the Foundation Trilogy. I got a book called it was the Foundation Trilogy. It was the first 3 Foundation books bound into one book. And I remember the idea of Harry Seldon, the character Harry Seldon, the idea of psychohistory, that you could chart the rise and fall of empires based on what was happening in the culture throughout that culture's history. And Harry Seldon had figured out ways, and he's on Trantor and and it's like, well, the Galactic Empire that runs everything now, you're going to fall. And he became this dangerous character. And I remember just getting wrapped up in the concepts. And at the same time, I'm still watching Star Trek, and I'm still watching Twilight Zone, and I'm still watching The Outer Limits, and I know all the names of the episodes. And it was all part of this heady, frothy mix. And the thing was, in the wake of Star Wars, there was an explosion of Star Wars ripoffs. But then in the wake of that, 2 years later, we got things like Alien and Superman. The movie came out in 1978. So fantasy media became supercharged. And it was really interesting. And of course, in the 70s, there was still a lot of dystopian science fiction. Like, I remember when Rollerball aired on television, we all watched it. We had a cul-de-sac at the end of my street, and the Westovers had a mailbox. They had a long driveway, and they had a mailbox, and that was the goal. And we would play Rollerball. We'd get on our roller skates, and somebody would have a motocross bike, and we'd beat each other up and try and stuff the ball in the mailbox because we'd seen Rollerball. It was like the coolest thing we'd ever seen. Did I understand the dystopian concepts and what corporate culture meant, the corporate wars? In the not-too-distant future, wars will no longer exist, but there will be Rollerball. I didn't quite get all that. I didn't understand, when I was watching Soylent Green, why are they calling women furniture? Everyone remembers the end of Soylent Green, but if you watch Soylent Green, it's a very interesting, it's a detective story, and it's a very interesting detective story, and it deals with a lot of crazy things. But so at the time, my developing mind, people ask me about you think about YA fiction. Well, my YA fiction was Dune. It was at least the first 3 Dune books, because God Emperor of Dune had not come out yet. So it was Dune, Dune Messiah, and Children of Dune. And of course, the story of Dune is not one of the white savior, as many people seem to think it is, which I can't stand. It's like everything else in our culture. People, they're armed with a little bit of information, they make these sweeping generalities, and they end up looking like idiots. That's why this weird confrontational tribalism of our political ideology drives me crazy, because I'm like, you guys, have you read a book? You know, read some theory, and I don't mean CRT either. There's more of the world than that. But it is very frustrating. And one of the things that I find, as far as the genre fan pundit space on YouTube, is I don't see a lot of, I see it becoming as polarizing as everything else. Something either sucks or somebody likes it. And by the way, I am guilty of this. And I will hold my head in shame, but I'm not wrong, so I'll continue on saying these things. No, but when I talk about, I think modern Star Trek, the thing that I really hate the most about modern Star Trek is original Star Trek that I grew up on was written by storytellers that worked in many different mediums. They worked in novels. They worked in screenplays. They worked in short stories. They were real writers that worked across many different mediums, and they understood how to structure a story. The problem that we have with modern Star Trek now is it's all written by people that have only ever written television. And they don't have a literary background, and that means when you're working in a literary genre like science fiction, you're writing, if you don't have a background in the literature, you're not going to write good science fiction stories. And that's what's been wrong with Star Trek. I mean, you know, people would say, well, Rob, you know, Rick Berman and Brandon Braga weren't exactly science fiction writers. No, they weren't. They weren't, but even modern Star Trek, you get somebody like Peter S. Beagle would contribute a story to, like, Sarek, which is a 3rd season Next Generation episode. And I think that's the real problem now, is there isn't the broad base of knowledge when people are writing this kind of thing. And if you're writing science fiction and you don't have a working knowledge of what science fiction as literature is, you're never going to write good science fiction. All you're going to write is derivative science fiction of other media properties that you've seen. And that's why the depiction of AI, for instance, in Star Trek, especially modern Star Trek, in Picard and Discovery, is no better than a 6th grade level of understanding of what AI is. And it makes me want to punch the screen. Now, you should see how AI is treated or not treated in the Dune franchise. Very interesting. The Butlerian Jihad, you know, find out about that. And see what what happened in the Dune universe with AI. Very interesting stuff. And so what I find fascinating is that Dune, being one of the great works of canonical, and one of the great work, not canonical like in canon, but the canonical works like the canon of great, let's call it Western science fiction. Dune is right up there. And what's really interesting is Dune is a political story. Dune is a religious allegory. There is a lot of Islam and Buddhism in Dune. There's a lot of ecology in Dune. There's a lot of commerce and finance in Dune. All of these nowadays, I don't like politics in my science fiction. Well, politics is science fiction, and Dune is a great example of that. Dune is a very political book, and that's one of the things that makes it interesting, just like Game of Thrones was very political. Now, it might not be addressing your direct political ideology of today, but it is an examination of how politics does, in fact, work. And that's what makes it interesting. I feel that today, one of the things that always blew my mind about certain science fiction was science fiction, as a rule, was really about intellectual inquiry. You picked up a science fiction book, it meant you were open-minded. It meant you were open-minded to all the different extrapolations of our current civilization that science fiction writers would frequently make. You know, when you're writing a story that takes place in the year 10,191, as Dune does, science fiction writers have to think to themselves, okay, well, where is humanity going to be at this point in time? I mean, even Frank Herbert knew that we would probably be post-humans, and if AI and technology, even when Dune came out in 1965, would be continuing to increase, and he had to figure out a way, like, I don't quite know where technology is going to go, so how can I get rid of it for my story so it doesn't hamper the tale I want to tell? Well, they have a very, I don't want to spoil it for anybody, but in the Dune universe, there's a reason why we have human computers as the mentats and why there isn't AI, and it's pretty cool. So these are all things that were going down in Dune. And of course, Dune is also about how power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. There's so many things that are going on in Dune that I find fascinating. Now, in our current day and age, in our IP-driven day and age, the problem with what we're getting from the studios now, you know, I just participated in a documentary about the year of 1982 and all the different movies that came out. And one of the things that I was talking about what happened in 82 and why it's significant as the greatest geek year ever is the sheer diversity of visions, of cinematic visions we were getting that year. And in the space of 2 months, we got, and I've said this a million times before, you've heard it a million times before, but I'm going to say it again. In the space of May to the end of June, we got Conan the Barbarian, The Road Warrior, Star Trek II, Poltergeist, Tron, Blade Runner, E.T., and John Carpenter's The Thing in less than a 2-month period of time. Now, these were from all the different studios. These were incredible visions that couldn't be more different from one another. And that was because it was talent-driven and story-driven, and the studios were betting on the talent, not the IP itself. And that's because movies didn't cost that much. Nowadays, it's totally inverted. Studios figure out, okay, what IP can we exploit? What IP do we have that people know? And if this movie's going to cost $150 or $200 million, we damn well better get it right. We have to have something. We can't make something original or brand new. We have to have something that people might know or that it's following up on a previously existing IP because we have to mitigate our risks. Studios were not spending. I mean, Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan cost like $11 million. And it was made by the television division of Paramount that were looking to save money after Star Trek The Motion Picture. And they brought in Harv Bennett and the TV department at Paramount to make that movie, so it was cheap. Well, nowadays, you want to make a Star Trek movie, they don't know how to make a Star Trek movie for less than $175 million, which seems silly to me, because Star Trek is about ideas. It's not about special effects or set design. I mean, they modern Star Trek has they've learned all the wrong lessons, and that's a incredible failure of imagination because the people making Star Trek don't have a literary background in science fiction. Because if they did, they'd realize you don't need money to have a great science fiction story, and that was what Star Trek was frequently able to do, was not have to spend a ton of money on compelling science fiction stories. But now we're in a position where, okay, the story of Dune is a very compelling story across many different levels. It works as sort of a Joseph Campbellian hero's journey, if you want it to be. It also deals with the plight of indigenous people. Well, indigenous. It deals with politics. It deals with warring families, the Hatfields and McCoys, or the Harkonnens and the Atreides. It deals with different approaches to the distribution of wealth. It deals with monarchies as opposed to democracies. It deals with all kinds of things. There's all kinds of things in Dune that make it a very rich story worth telling. But now that's not why they decided to make it. They're like, wow, Dune, there's an IP. And they have a great filmmaker in Denis Villeneuve. But Dune is an incredible risk because it is heady sci-fi. And I have a theory. I don't think that Dune would have been made in the modern age unless Game of Thrones was a hit. Regardless of what you think of the 8th season of Game of Thrones, for almost a decade, it was appointment television that sort of changed the way people thought of science fiction and fantasy narratives. That was also coming on the heels of Lord of the Rings. If Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones didn't work, and other shows like Outlander, or even shows like Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, and even the HBO shows like The Sopranos, long-form, intricate storytelling, I don't think Dune would have been remade. The Sci-Fi Channel did it, but it wouldn't have been done as a feature film. In the wake of all of these things over the beginning of the 21st century, all of the storytelling that we saw, Dune became viable, but it was a decision that I'm sure was probably made at the studio level, whatever. But you had an up-and-coming filmmaker like Denis Villeneuve who's shown he could work, whether it was Prisoners, whether it was Sicario, whether it was The Enemy, whether it was Incendies, of course, Arrival, and of course, Blade Runner 2049. Why they thought Blade Runner 2049 was a good idea. Blade Runner is a cult movie at best, and it didn't make any money. But God loved Denis Villeneuve, who made, in my estimation, one of the great sequels ever made because he was left alone, and the film was so handsomely mounted and beautifully made that, of course, everybody thought, great. He did a phenomenal job. One of his dream projects is to make Dune. So as we all know, Dune is only the first half of the book. And I have reported on this before, but the intent is to make 3 Dune movies, at least at first. Dune, what they call Dune Prophet, and Dune Messiah, which is the rise and fall of Paul Atreides. And he falls pretty hard for those who've read the books. So put that white savior myth out of your mind right now. You've clearly not read Dune Messiah, because if you had, you'd know not to say that. But anyway, so that's what they've done. And according to people who saw the movie, I guess it's Dune Part 1, I think. Not Dune Book 1, because they need to make the second half of the book. So I guess it's Part 1. It says that at the beginning of the movie. So now we're in a situation where they've made this incredibly expensive, beautifully mounted, as evidenced by what was shown last night in the trailer that dropped today. They've spared no expense, and they have a visionary filmmaker whose, one of his life goals was to readapt Dune. You would think this kind of thing would be par for the course in Hollywood, that they would be finding talent, that they weren't just plucking talent out because of, well, diversity. What you want to find is filmmakers that are passionate about a subject matter, especially something like this, and now have the toolbox where they can realize it the way they wanted to realize it. And one of the things I love about Denis Villeneuve as a filmmaker is I'm the viceroy of verisimilitude, so I'm always looking for the reality. If you look at how special effects are utilized, go back to Arrival. Look at how the alien craft are incorporated into the wide shots where you see them over landscapes or over the ocean. To me, he's Mr. Peak verisimilitude when it comes to showing those kinds of things, because he's interested in making you believe. A lot of the time you see in modern filmmaking now, when you cut to a visual effect shot, visual effect shots are pre-visualized, and it's almost like, okay, the director's doing live action, but now you're going to go and incorporate the previs stuff that they did at the third floor. Or not that that's a bad thing, but frequently the directorial vision and the action sequences and the effects don't jibe. And the overall feeling of the effect sequences isn't quite in keeping with the rest of the directorial vision of the movie. This is not the case with Denis Villeneuve's science fiction films. If you go look at Arrival and Blade Runner 2049, there is a synergy between the visual effects and the live action photography that makes the film seamless, which creates something that is unique to his filmmaking. Nowhere is that more apparent than looking at how the effects are utilized in the Dune trailer. As a matter of fact, I don't think I have ever seen a science fiction movie that has what looked to be as seamless of effects as Dune does, at least as evidence from the trailer. It all feels real, peak verisimilitude. I don't think I've seen, of course, my final judgments will be reserved until I see the film. But what's really interesting about this film, at least in my mind, is our civilization. I really believe that we have been infantilized over the last, in the smartphone era. Because as soon as we're able now, which we can, to curate the information that comes to us, we make sure that we're really only ever getting information that we want to receive. And when I was growing up, getting books from the Science Fiction Book Club, I would get books, they did sound intriguing to me, but my mind had to be very open to new things, to experience what these science fiction writers had to offer to me. And that was one of the great things about reading science fiction, is it was mind expanding because of the concepts, the heady concepts that they were dealing with. And sometimes I had a hard time. I wasn't smart enough to get my head around a lot of the concepts, and sometimes I'd have to go back and read things again, and I'd puzzle over them. And there were books I read I still don't think I got, 40 years later. And that's okay. But now I feel that our civilization, we only want to get stuff that we want to get, as opposed to when I was a kid, I was pulling stuff from everywhere, and everything was exciting. Like, ooh, this is interesting. Or there was always something to be interested in, even if I was like, well, I wouldn't be interested in this, but then you see it. And I still see glimmers of hope. I'm not saying all is bad now. That's why people like Joe Rogan are popular, because whatever you think about Joe Rogan as a person, if you're not a fan of him personally or politically or whatever, you can't deny that he brings on this potpourri of guests. And, if you sit down and watch a Joe Rogan podcast for 3 hours or whatever, even if he brings on somebody that you might not particularly care for when you've seen them in other appearances, to sit down and watch somebody talk about their beliefs for 3 hours, there's got to be something you find that's compelling or interesting or unique. And when I look at Dune, my thought is, on one hand, I'm deeply pessimistic that the movie's going to make money, because it asks a lot of the audience in the sense that it's very smart. And while it does have a great story that follows a lot of traditional story arcs, it's got great villains, it's got battles, it's got royal families that are warring, it's got all that kind of stuff that it still requires intelligence on the part of the audience. But I think that our fantasy, science fiction and fantasy of the last 20 years, if you like Game of Thrones and if you like The Expanse, both of these things, coincidentally, are literary-based properties, so they have the depth. They can take the depth from their source material. Even something like Outlander, another great show, again, literary-based. And, of course, there are media properties like Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul that were created originally for television. But we are living through a very sophisticated era of media, science fiction, fantasy, and horror, which I think is terrific. So I think more so than ever, I'm optimistic that Dune will make money, because if it doesn't make $800 to $1 billion, they're not going to make another Dune. Now, it's been announced they have a new showrunner for the Sisterhood, which I'm also looking forward to, because the Bene Gesserit, by the way, the roles of women in the Dune franchise, while it might not be as apparent in the first Dune as it does become later in the books, the role of women and female characters is a huge part of the Dune mythos. So they did make a gender swap that people are bitching about. Liet Kynes, Dr. Kynes, in the book or in the movie, if you've seen the David Lynch version, it was played by Max von Sydow. They've changed her to a woman. I find this to be, in the case of certain adaptations and storytelling, I have no problem with this at all, because Dr. Kynes is, of course, not a pivotal character that's really important to the narrative, so I have no problem with that. And if they do portray her as the mother of a character who used to be her father that was there, I don't have a problem with that at all. And I think it's an invalid criticism to take it to task for that. I understand Denis Villeneuve wants to have more female characters in the this is not some ideological thing. He wants to set up the expectation in the audience that female characters are hugely important to the Dune universe. And the fact that they're also developing a Bene Gesserit sisterhood. The Bene Gesserits are like the space nuns, but unlike, say, in Star Trek Picard, their space nuns are incredibly well developed and have a very rich history and play a huge part in the tapestry of the universe that is being portrayed. But I'm hoping... I was blown away by the first Dune trailer. I knew the story, so it was just a glimpse at what we're going to see. But this trailer, I don't know about all of you, but I felt it was epic. I loved it, and it made me more excited. This was my most eagerly awaited film of 2020. Then it became my most eagerly awaited film of 2021. And seeing what they've been able to pull off and accomplish. And if you know the story, I mean, I read the Dune script. As I said, they made some changes in it. The way it began with Charlotte Rampling's character sort of explaining to you the universe. Now, because of reshoots and things, they've made a change. They've added Zendaya's character, Chani, who addresses the Fremen and immediately, I think, frames the story in a better way. Kudos to you. Denis for figuring this out, but the script for Dune was a great script. I mean, hell, Warner Brothers gave this channel a copyright strike because I reported on the script and talked about how much I loved it, as if the story of Dune is some secret all the way back to 1965. I really do love everything about this project, and seeing the trailers. I mean, this could. I'm expecting nothing less than it's joining the great pantheon of science fiction films. I mean, the first Dune, David Lynch's Dune, certainly did not for various reasons, and the Sci-Fi Channel miniseries was worthy, but it was more like a play. It didn't have the kind of scope this movie seems to have, and I am really hoping that this is a huge gamble on Warner Brothers' part. They hope it's going to be a monstrous success, but they're still releasing it in the time of COVID with the Delta variants, and now is it the Lambda variant I read about yesterday? I think there's a new variant. I don't want to see us going back into lockdown, even though mask mandates hit us again. We shall see what's going to happen. I've got my own movie coming out, Tango Shalom, that I produced, coming out on the 3rd theatrically. Hopefully, we might have to push it. We don't know. Or it could torpedo the theatrical release entirely, which would suck. But, we'll see where it goes. But Warner Brothers and No Time to Die, the new Bond film, are two hugely expensive movies coming out in October, which require worldwide grosses. I mean, No Time to Die, if it's not $1 billion, it's a disappointment. And Dune, certainly, if it's $1 billion, they'll make more. And we'll see. Hopefully, it'll be a cause celeb. But I think it speaks to our imaginations. I mean, are people going to go see Dune? In our civilization that we currently live in now, will people have the attention span to sit down and let Dune wash over them? Will they go to the theaters? I know it's going to be day and date with HBO Max, but my God, after seeing the trailer, don't you want to go to the biggest, even says it was shot in IMAX, don't you want to go see this movie in a giant IMAX theater? After seeing Blade Runner 2049 in an IMAX theater, I went on a Tuesday afternoon because I couldn't see it the opening weekend, and it was one of the most mind-blowing theatrical experiences. The sound design, seeing it on an IMAX screen, feeling the sound design of that movie is overwhelming, and the score, it was just, I cannot wait. Everyone's saying that the score for Dune that they've come up with is incredible, and I'm hoping that the collective imaginations of all of us will be ignited. The sleeper must awaken, and I'm hoping that it will stand as a testament to what, when I was reading science fiction, when I was a kid, seeing these or reading about these visions, it really opened my mind to the possibilities of existence, or as Q said, the unknown possibilities of existence. And as a 10-year-old and 11 and 12-year-old, reading science fiction literature left me with a deep, lifelong, abiding love of the genre, and part of that was Dune. And I'm really hoping that people will go back and rediscover a book series that was written in 1965. And I'm really hoping that we'll see. I mean, we'll see that happen. I'm really very excited. I was really blown away by what we saw, and I'm hoping that imagination connoisseurs will be newly minted after going to see this film in the theater. And who's to say? I don't know. Anyway, let's see what you guys have to say. A man has no name writes in and says, Dear Robert, I write to you today as somebody who has been proud to be a nerd for all 24 years of my life. I love Lord of the Rings, Marvel, DC, and so much more. But above all else, I loved Star Wars. I didn't know it initially, but these things helped me cope with a difficult childhood. Star Wars was an escape for me, a way to see the human heart in conflict with itself, that I could learn from, a canvas where problems could be both larger and simpler than in real life, but where those same problems and their resolutions taught me how I should live. Sure, I didn't love everything under the Star Wars banner. I never found much value in the prequels of the Clone Wars TV series, and I'm fine with that. I'm glad that others enjoy them more than I do, but I won't lie and say that I didn't feel a special joy with the new Star Wars trilogy. For the first time since the originals, this finally felt like Star Wars again. Okay. These were the first Star Wars movies I saw on the big screen. We didn't really go to the movies all that often growing up, but beyond the thrill of seeing Star Wars on the big screen for the first time, there was something that resonated with me. It was more than just enjoying these films. Even in The Rise of Skywalker, a movie I quite disliked, I felt things that made a difference to me. You see, I was at a crossroads in my life. I'd grown up being abused by my parents. After I moved out, I began to realize that my childhood wasn't normal, and eventually I cut my parents out of my life. In response, they began spreading lies about me, called the police on me in an attempt to exact revenge, and at one point even tried to kidnap me. I even had to cut my siblings out of my life because I couldn't trust them not to betray me to my parents again. Life was, to put it mildly, quite difficult, and sometimes it was absolutely miserable. Throughout all of this, fandom acted as a respite from the worries of the world, Star Wars especially. I found a greater appreciation for the Star Wars sequel trilogy in particular. I felt Ben Solo's anger, pain, confusion, and loneliness. From Luke Skywalker, I learned that no matter what had happened in the past with my friends and family, I could come out of my life of self-imposed isolation. He gave me hope that although certain wounds may never heal, that maybe someday I'll be able to see my siblings again, and we can be a family once more. Even in The Rise of Skywalker, a movie I didn't particularly enjoy, I've tried to focus on things I can learn from, such as Rey's decision to define her own family. I know not everyone derives the same sense of enjoyment from these films that I do. Not every work of art hits everybody in the same way. Hell, I seem to be the only person on the planet who hated Luke's appearance in The Mandalorian. I'm okay with that, since I know not everything will work out for me, or will work for me, and that there's plenty of other things for me to enjoy. I wish everybody else saw what I saw in the Star Wars sequel trilogy, but I've accepted that just like I didn't like the prequels, it's okay that others dislike the sequels. That, by the way, is a very important lesson to learn. At the end of the day, as important as these things are to us, they're just movies. They have incredible power to make us think and feel, but they can also be easily ignored if we choose to do so. Sadly, I don't think people can bring themselves to do that anymore. It pains me to say it, but toxic people everywhere I look may be leading me to rethink my fandom. Fellow conservatives say I'm not a real conservative because I enjoy SJW liberal propaganda. Star Wars fans say I'm not a real Star Wars fan because I'm a conservative or because I didn't like what they liked. Ordinarily, I would ignore them, but it has come to the point where I can't talk about Star Wars with anybody without the conversation devolving into another unwanted conflict. And not just a conflict, but a conflict where I'm the wrongdoer, not because of what I've done, but because of what I like. What was once a place for me to cope, to relax, to learn, and heal has nearly become exactly what I was trying to leave in the first place. I always thought that the fact that I love Star Wars made me, a Star Wars fan. But apparently that's not enough anymore. And while I'm not happy about that, I can accept it. I've learned what I needed, but I mourn for the future masses who won't be able to learn from and enjoy what they want because they're told it's wrong to enjoy something. I hope that others will learn from the example of people like you. You frequently disagree with people's takes, but you do so in a respectful manner that shows your disagreement comes from a place of love for imagination and wonder, rather than a hate for perceived failings in artists. Thank you for providing a place for all of us to share our love for storytelling, and to loosely quote Chris Carr, may we all learn to stop yucking on each other's yum. I tell you, man, sometimes I get these letters, they make me tear up inside. That was from A Man Has No Name. Well, first of all, a phenomenal letter. And I don't think it can be said enough that one of the great things about growing up being a Star Trek and a science fiction fan is that when you would get together with other science fiction fans, we frequently had disagreements. I mean, that was kind of part of it. You'd go to science fiction conventions because we didn't have the internet, so we couldn't bitch and moan and complain with our friends or enemies. And frequently you'd get in these long, drawn-out conversations where you'd argue and bitch and moan and complain. Now, I like those conversations because I like having spirited debates with people. One, because I learn. If somebody believes something that I don't, or they think differently than me, they're the first people that I want to talk to, because in talking to somebody that disagrees with you, while talking to them, reassess your own beliefs, and you're constantly asking yourself, okay, why does this person believe these things? And when they're making their case to you, then you have to dig deep into your own beliefs and question also, why do you believe what you believe? Because here's the thing. If you're fighting somebody or arguing or maybe you're on the other side of the fence from someone, there is nothing wrong with engaging that person in a respectful manner and find out why they believe what they believe, because it helps you redefine what you believe. And it's not going to change. There shouldn't be acrimony here. I think it's always healthy to always reassess your own belief system. And I think that one of the things that, like, I do not like the Star Wars sequel trilogy for a number of reasons. But you eloquently stated, A Man Has No Name, eloquently stated why you do. And I mean, they spoke to you personally. Now, this is not right or wrong. It just is. No one can ever take the fact away from you that a story spoke to you in such a way that Ben Solo was somebody that you completely identified with, that your own familial situation was analogous to what he was going through. If someone doesn't like the prequel trilogy, the sequel trilogy, they didn't have the experience that you did. And I think for myself, when I hear you explain this to me, now I understand why the sequel trilogy, specifically Ben Solo's arc and what happened in their family, meant something to you. And I'll tell you something, you're not wrong. Everything you said is completely valid. And you can't ever let anyone tell you that experience is wrong, because you're looking at it from a different way than I look at it. I didn't have the experience you had growing up. I didn't have the real life experience that you had growing up. So the fact that this story resonated with you the way it did, that is your experience of the world, and it is not invalid. No one can tell you any differently, and if they do, they're fucking idiots. And I think that's true of everything. Now, as much as I rail about Star Trek Discovery and I rail about modern Star Trek, I hate modern Star Trek. I think since 2009, Star Trek has been, frankly, stupid. All of it. It's being written by people that don't know science fiction. So not only are the stories dumb and nonsensical, not only are they bad stories, but they're bad science fiction. That said, there are going to be people that start watching Star Trek Discovery, and that's their first experience of Star Trek. They haven't read a lot of science fiction, and the things that I object to, they don't see. And you might have, say, an 11-year-old girl starts watching Star Trek Discovery, and she really likes Sonequa Martin Green. She's never seen a character that's that strong and powerful, a female character, on screen before. Would I want to tell that 11-year-old girl that it sucks? No. That's when I'm smart enough to hold my tongue, and that's when I'm smart enough to engage in a conversation and say, you know, isn't it great that you have a TV show with a character that you love that means something to you? It's not my place to tell an 11-year-old girl that she doesn't know what the fuck she's talking about, because her experience of Discovery is not my experience of Discovery, and her experience with Star Trek isn't mine. She's only 11, and she's only seen one Star Trek show. She doesn't know about the fucking Star Trek show that happened in 1966, nor is it my place to explain that to her then. My place is to encourage her to watch more Star Trek, delve into a franchise that's 55 years old this year, and celebrate the fact that there's something that she likes. And what's really interesting is I should be able to redefine and re-examine my thoughts about modern Star Trek, hearing them through her eyes. And if I can't do that, the problem isn't with her, the problem's with me. And I think this is something that I don't understand why we don't feel it this way anymore. We're so divided into tribes by weird things that we've forgotten, like, gosh, if I talk to somebody who disagrees with me, that's how I learn. I mean, they might explain their position and I might still disagree with them, but at least I can refine how I believe or what I think of my own position, And it helps me become, I think, a better person, a more knowledgeable person, and somebody that's a better thinker. That's why the idea that ideas, that we have people putting forth the idea in academia that ideas are somehow violence. No, ideas are just ideas. And the idea that if you don't like somebody who's going to come speak at a college campus, you would protest them speaking, what are you afraid of? Because your ideas should be able to combat the ideas that you disagree with. And you should be able to state those ideas and know how to state them in a debate where you can actually exchange these ideas. And hopefully the way you present your ideas and the way somebody else presents their ideas, if you think their ideas are bad, that should be self-evident when you exchange these ideas in a public forum, allowing everybody to hear what you have to say. It is so strange to me that we now live in a world where ideas are being squelched. And people that I would have thought are on my side of the ideological spectrum are some of the most egregious destroyers of discourse. And that's not what we need. We need to be smart enough to understand that you look at a situation, you assess a situation, and allow the situation to develop, because maybe you'll learn something. So I agree. I am not a fan of where fandom is as a whole. And you know what? There's been a lot of people that accuse me of like, well, who are you? If they don't like somebody, if they don't like other YouTube personalities, people come after me and they take those assessments of these YouTube personalities that they don't like, and they accuse me, they hurl things at me. Well, if you're talking to these people, then you must be one of them. What kind of assessment is that? I talk to lots of people in all walks of my life. I learn from people. I try and understand where people are coming from. And I'll tell you this, the fact is, we do live in a place where the stories that we were used to hearing were much purer than they are now, because they were derived from literature. They were derived from the great stories. Nowadays, the whole reason for telling stories, especially in our space, is one of money. And the fact that that becomes the sole purpose behind telling these stories, or the fact that these stories are now being subverted because of some agenda. Remember the laws of this channel. Never let your universe or your agenda come before your characters and your stories. And it is. The idea that people think they have something to preach or teach you is absurd. Great stories don't tell you what to think. Great stories offer you things to think about. And that's very different. And what people in our space on YouTube, what a lot of them are railing against, are the fact that stories themselves are being destroyed in favor of a political ideology or identity politics. And if stories themselves are destroyed, how far is we need stories to sort of define us. That's how we define our own humanity, is through stories, whether it's a real story, a fictional story, a story your aunt told you about the first time she met your uncle. I mean, these stories, the purity of stories must be preserved. And what we're living through now is a time when stories are being perverted by people that believe that they're preaching some kind of truth that you need to know. Well, that kind of storytelling is fucking horrible. And most of us are railing against that because you're subverting stories as a truth, because all great stories, even the greatest fictional stories, have great truths in them. That's what makes them great stories. But what's happening is those stories are being subverted and destroyed by people that believe their agendas or their belief systems should be pushed down your throat. The great thing about a great story is just, it's there. It's for you to unlock and you to discover. It's not for an author to come in and to tell you, you need to read this story because you need to be this kind of a person and you need to act accordingly. That's some dangerous shit. I'm sick and tired of it. I might rail against it in a different way than some people, but it's fucking bullshit. And I'm tired of it. And our agenda-based storytelling is subverting our very civilization. And it is wrong. And it is bad. And it is going to have far-reaching ramifications. And it's damaging. And, I will always believe that because I'm watching it happen. And I think that's what people are really reacting to, is that the truth of great storytelling, the truth of great fiction is being destroyed. And that's dangerous for all of us. Anyway, great letter. Thank you for writing it. I very much appreciate it. Charlie the Unicorn writes in and says, I have a topic that has been rolling around in my mind for a few months. Actually, ever since Zack Snyder released his Justice League cut on HBO Max and Patty Jenkins released her Wonder Woman 84. Movies to the huddled movie connoisseurs earlier in 2021, specifically the topic of Gal Gadot, Wonder Woman, and her depiction upon the big screen. Full disclosure, I'm not the hugest Wonder Woman fan in the world. Sure, I watched the old TV show from the 70s and 80s. I've seen some of the various iterations within comics and animated shows and movies. So I'm interested in what the secret sauce is that Zack Snyder brings to the superhero table that makes her a fabulous movie character. Does he understand a universal, relatable female character better than others within the comic movie universe? I've heard from all four quadrants of people that thoroughly and completely enjoyed the first Wonder Woman movie, except this CGI crap at the end. The scene with Wonder Woman going into no man's land is still on the top 10 comic book movie moments for me. It showed power, grace, and her acknowledging mortals trying to save her, a god not needing to be saved. Anti-derivative Jill sends in a unicorn super sticker. I don't think anyone's ever sent me a unicorn super sticker before. I don't know if that's a pride uniform or a unicorn, but I'm all for it. So anti-derivative Jill, thanks for that. And by the way, kudos for the name Anti-Derivative Jill. I love that. Anyway, the scene with Wonder Woman going to no man's land is still on the top 10 comic book movie moments for me. It showed power, grace, and her acknowledging mortals trying to save, a god not needing to be saved, inspiring her to be much more than she had ever been before. Patty Jenkins directed the movie, but Zack Snyder laid the framework and the cast, the personification of the character, with Gal Gadot as the near-perfect actress for the part. Her parts within Justice League and Batman v Superman were universally praised, even if portions of the movie around her character were skewered by fans and critics. With this being a question burning in my mind, I went back and watched one of the first movies that catapulted Zack Snyder into stardom, 300. While watching this movie, I got to watch the creation of another strong female character within the movie, Lena Headey, as Queen Gorgo. Many of the same qualities bequeathed to Wonder Woman were found within this character. She was tough, but fair. She believed in mankind being better than what it was, believed in ideals that are universal. Much like Wonder Woman is to Batman and Superman, the holy DC Trinity, she was the perfect complement to King Leonidas. She was strong when he was weak. So this led me to believe that Zack Snyder has a better grasp upon how to write and or direct heroines for the modern movie fan than almost any other filmmaker currently. Universally appealing heroines, all that all people can relate to and not feel pandered to. Men wanted to be with her and women wanted to be her. Very, very, very tough to do in this modern world. Make a universally loved female heroine. Yet, he has done this with multiple female characters, first with Queen Gorgo and now with Wonder Woman. I noticed that his wife, Deborah Snyder, has been a producer on many of his movies. Could she be his secret weapon? Is she that influential that between the two of them, they're able to craft and make the perfect female heroine? A million others have tried to make universally appealing and profitable female lead superheroes, hell, any movie, and he succeeds where others fail. I've heard this mentioned before, but I'm curious on yours and the PGS's take on the rollout of the Wonder Woman character under Zack Snyder's influence. Note, this is in no way throwing shade at Patty Jenkins. She put together one of the great comic book movies of all time in 2017. I'm equally excited what she can do with the upcoming Rogue Squadron movie. I've got a story to tell regarding the first time I watched Jaws at around 4 or 5 years old and my reaction to Ready Player One, which I just watched for the first time yesterday, but those are stories for another day. To all, be well always. Charlie the Unicorn. Well, a great letter. Here's my thoughts about this. When you are dealing with great mythic characters, and I would say that gods, historical figures, Wonder Woman, Superman, mythic characters transcend their gender. Mythic characters are truly mythic characters. And I'm not saying you have to write female characters as men or male characters as women, because you don't. I'm talking about characters of myth. They are beyond humanity. They are better than we are. And one of the great things I think about Wonder Woman is Wonder Woman both embraces her femininity, and she is first and foremost a woman, but she's also a mythic character, so she can do both. And I think the fact that she is empathetic to mankind, I mean, this is the empathy of female empathy. Look, with all of our gender roles or whatever, I'm not going to refer back to that, but motherhood. You know, until men can start caring and delivering children, bringing children into the world, motherhood is something that is unique to women. And the thing, does that mean people can't be parents? Does that mean a trans woman can't be a good mother? No, it doesn't. Because a trans woman is a woman. And a trans woman just happened to be born in the wrong body. But until, you know, biological science increases a little bit more, a trans woman can't carry a baby to term yet. But I think that motherhood and the feminine impulse to protect is something unique. And when you're writing a female superhero, you can't forget that. And I think we saw a little bit about that, especially in the extended versions of Wonder Woman and the deleted scenes. There's a great moment when she's in England and she sees a baby for the first time, because there are no babies on Themyscira. There isn't. So when she sees a baby, you see that maternal instinct kick in. And I thought that was a great little bit. But when she's able to, that no man's land sequence, that is a mythic character doing a mythic thing. And I think that Zack Snyder deals in myth. I don't think he's necessarily so great when it comes to, I don't know if Zack Snyder would be the director I would go to make, I don't know, a rom-com. I don't want to see Zack Snyder's About a Boy or Zack Snyder's The Notebook. I don't want to see that. I don't want to see Zack Snyder's When Harry Met Sally. No interest. But I think Zack Snyder does, through his visuals, have a good handle on creating mythic characters, or at least visualizing them. And I think, look, how often, I mean, how many people you've got, Christopher Nolan, he works with his wife, Deborah Snyder and Zack Snyder working together. I think that says a lot about him as a man. You know, working with your wife that's also your significant other, that shows you're pretty secure in your manhood, and that you also realize that the value of having your wife. I mean, look, I have had great collaborative relationships with women in my life, and to be honest, they're, I think, the best kind of relationships to collaborate in that way, and certainly creatively if you're on the same page. As a matter of fact, I think female producers are sometimes better to deal with than male producers, at least for me. Not that male producers are bad, but I think Zack Snyder might understand that. You know, and what's really interesting is the idea of myth is frequently wrapped up in this idea of the male gaze. Like, you can't do that. And I think it's wrong. You know, I think it's wrong to, one of the things that I think is very weird about the Black Widow film is one of the plot points of Black Widow's character and Yelena's character is that the idea of reproduction, and Yelena even talks about it in Black Widow, is taken away from them. To be a widow is to lose the ultimate femininity of womanhood, which is to give birth. Now, I'm not saying, is that the only thing that women do? No. But we can't do it. Men can't give birth, and it's something that women can do that's unique to them. And when you take away, I mean, there's going to be a lot of people that will say, look, I was adopted. My mother couldn't have children. Does that make her less of a mother? No. But I am saying that there is a biological reality to life right now. And part of the reason that widows have hysterectomies, or actually their entire uteruses are removed, is because they don't want to pour all this training into these killers if they're going to have kids. So they take that away from them. So all the work that they put in and the training isn't for naught. And it also means that they can utilize, we don't see that in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but we certainly saw it in Red Sparrow with Jennifer Lawrence, that these women are also taught seduction as a weapon of war and getting what they want. I mean, they're not going to go that far in the Marvel Cinematic Universe because it's still PG. But I think that's all part of the characterization that you're dealing with. And it's part of the mythology of what does it mean when you're shaping an assassin. You know, you strip away their humanity. And that's part of how women in the Black Widow program are dehumanized. They destroy that part of you. But what's interesting is, I don't think desexualizing Black Widow is what you really want to do, because if anything, that's part of her character too. They would teach you the art of seduction. But yes, I understand We have to make sure that Black Widow is no longer part of the male gaze. But let's face it, the male gaze is a biological imperative. What we need to understand is how to control it, like anything else. You don't want to get rid of it. You want to control it and have people know how to use it and understand who and what they are, and not take away someone else's ability to lead their lives unfettered from your assholishness. But anyway, what a great letter. And I think that that's what I think. I think that Zack Snyder understands how to create both male and female characters that are mythic. And I don't think a lot of people know how to do that. And not only that, in this day and age, it's actively poo-pooed. It's actively being worked against by certain members of the audience. Lame. Which kind of is a bummer. Let's see. Let's see now. Jason Webster writes in. Oh, wait. No, I already read that one. I'm looking. Science Nerd. This one. Science Nerd. I've got so many letters. I'm trying to catch up. Hi, Rob. I'm just catching up on all the TV and movies. Life has been pretty hectic lately, and my podcast and book has been put on hold. I'm sorry to hear that. I'm probably going back to uni to learn more about AI. When I started, it was mostly lab and field work, but we also need to know more about computing. This is pretty funny to me because I nearly became a programmer and scientist. Unfortunately, it was a difficult industry for girls to get into. Even in school, you had difficulty obtaining time to practice your coding skills. The boys would be allowed first, so the only time you could get time to work on your skills was very late in the evening. And to think I was more knowledgeable and was the better coder, I have the satisfactory knowledge those boys who the school thought had potential did sod all. You also never told your friends that one of your hobbies was to play video games or that you could make them. I always knew having a computing background would be a necessity tool in science. The world has definitely changed for the better, but more needs to be done. So in a few months' time, I will be going back to learn computing to improve my science skills. With the epigenetics field exploding in the next 10 years, it's going to be mad, especially with the use of CRISPR technology. Yeesh. We are living in crazy times, and no longer will it be science fiction, but science fact. In this month alone, we've had 2 billionaires travel to space. More are to follow. Holidays in space and the moon and Mars are going to be a reality. I bet you're going to enter Branson's raffle ticket competition. Why not? Scientists are even now trying to stop and delay aging and maybe even reverse it. It's not even thought to be laughable. Today is a great time to be a scientist. I love hearing you say that. I have to mention, I'm looking forward to seeing the new Jurassic Park movie. I have only ever liked the first one, which had help from one of my favorite paleontologists, Robert T. Baker. His book, The Dinosaur Heresies, is fantastic, a must-read for undergraduates, and to think that when the first movie came out, we never knew they had feathers. But now we do. It's believed they're going to add this to the new film. It's amazing to think how much we've learned about dinosaurs in the 30 years since. I forgot to mention Dune. I read all the books as a teen. What I liked about the novels, everyone is pretty awful. Even Paul. I'm wondering how the public will react if they go through the complete series of books, being careful not to give any spoilers. As you've read the novel, Rob, you know what I mean. Oh, I do. Lastly, I have to mention Star Trek. I've totally given up with it now. I actually had an idea for a story within the universe. I'm off to reread the Red Mars Trilogy. Do you think that could get a TV movie or a series? Anyways, take care, Rob. Kim Stanley Robinson's Mars Trilogy is one of my favorite science fiction trilogies. Red Mars, Green Mars, and Blue Mars. My God, if you want to read some compelling science fiction, walk and don't run. I mean, what am I saying? Run, don't walk. That's what I wanted to say. Run, don't walk, and get yourself Kim Stanley Robinson's Mars Trilogy, beginning with Red Mars. First of all, one of the most entertaining trilogies I've ever read, but it's all about the colonization of Mars and about how it's being terraformed. That's why, hence, Red Mars, Green Mars, Blue Mars. And they are hugely entertaining books with a great cast of characters, a lot of really interesting science Kim Stanley Robinson. As a matter of fact, I mean, look at this right here. I'm a huge fan of Kim Stanley Robinson's, although I have to say, this book has been sitting next to me. I've got, as a matter of fact, look at it. Check this out. This is nuts. These have been sitting next to me. Here, look at this. Ministry for the Future and Green Earth. These have been sitting here for months, and I have yet to read them. Why? Why, Kim Stanley Robinson? I've been letting you down. I apologize. I buy these books. I just stack them up places. I'm like, ugh, I got to get this. But yes, so anyway, sorry, I don't mean to just talk about that, science nerd. But yes, go read those books again because they are effing great. If you really want to read some great, heady, fun science fiction, which might point the way to the future, Kim Stanley Robinson's Mars Trilogy will do you up well. There are books that before I die, I feel I need to acquire the first editions of them. And I gave away, I had Red Mars. I had the first edition of Red Mars. I don't even remember who I gave it to. I can't remember. I'm like, please give it back if you have it. I need to get the first editions of those books. I had a lot of great first editions, but in my great storage mishap of 2012, I lost about 2,000 of my first edition science fiction, fantasy, and hardcover books. I think about it, I get agitated. Those are the only things I ever really, the only autographs I collected. So if you ever come across, say, I don't know, the Gunslinger, I never got the Gunslinger signed. If you ever come across Clive Barker's Books of Blood, and it says to Rob Clive Barker, and they're the original British releases, those are mine. Just so you know. Anyway, so yes, science nerd, go back to school, learn all that is learnable, be like V'ger, you're never too young. I mean, I got to go back to the greatest advice I ever read in Dear Abby. Yes, Dear Abby. I used to read Dear Abby all the time, and my favorite Dear Abby column, it's paraphrasing, but a woman had written in, I believe she said she was 42 years old, maybe she was 40. She said she's 42 years old, and she always wanted to be a doctor, and she thought about being a doctor, and that's what she wanted to do in her life. And she said, well, I never did it, but if I go into school again and I'm a doctor, I'd go through medical school, and then I'd go through my residency, and by the time I'm an actual doctor, I'm going to be 50. And what was Abigail Van Buren's advice? You're going to be 50 anyway. That's it, man. In the modern age, that's all you need to know. If you have to ask yourself, I don't know if I can do that, that's the answer. You're going to be 50 anyway. That was the greatest advice I ever read, ever, in her advice column. I love that. Never forgot it. I'm paraphrasing. You could probably look that up and find it. Greatest thing ever. But I'm paraphrasing it. Maybe the Mandela effect is taken over, but I think that's pretty close to the way it was. And that's the way it is. Daniel Doherty writes in, Dear Mr. Burnett, I've been watching your show for a year or so now, although I do not agree with you on a few points. I just have to say what you do is awesome, and holy crap, your website is huge. Good work on that. Anyway, I wanted to ask you if you have seen a film called Christiana F. I watched it when I was 16. Is that the heroin movie? I have seen it. And it changed my life. It stuck with me to my core, especially the withdrawal scenes and how easy it is for a young girl to get hooked on heroin. From what I remember of the film, it is directed amazingly, and it slides into darkness the more the main character, Christiana, goes deeper into her addiction. If you read this, thank you, and I hope other people look into this film. You won't regret it. Thanks again, and hail to the Post-Geek Singularity. Well, Daniel Doherty, what a nice letter. Yes, Christiane F., I watched that when it first came out. I want to say that's 82? Let's find out, shall we? I want to find out. And I want to say it's a foreign film, isn't it? Let's see. Yeah, it's Uli Adel. It's 81. It's not. See, I thought it was 82. It's 81. Yeah. So I saw that movie at the Seattle Film Festival, and it's German. That's what I thought. It's a German movie, and yes, Christiane F. Yeah, I want to see that. A bored 13-year-old growing up in mid-70s West Berlin, and she becomes a 14-year-old heroin addict, and it's based on a 1978 nonfiction book. So, indeed, I did see that movie. God, man, that means I saw that movie 40 fucking years ago. Jesus. Jesus. At the Seattle Film Festival, I'm sure that's where I saw it. Either that or at the Egyptian where they have the film festival. Great letter. Everybody should read it. Nate Gendron says, "Hi, Rob. Long-time listener, first-time caller or writer or whatever it is that I'm doing here. First off, I'm so excited to be working together on a theatrical release of Tango Shalom this fall in Canada. Fingers crossed for a great turnout." Now, I have to say that Nathan is somebody that both reached out to John Campia and myself. He is a booker at Cineplex Odeon Cinemas, and hopefully they have it. I mean, our distributor's Vision got it to I gave them your name, but they gave it to somebody they knew, so apparently it is under consideration at Cineplex Odeon, and you guys handle everything. I would love nothing more than to see it open there. Obviously, COVID's a big deal, but anyway. So thanks for that, Nathan. You reached out to me, so I thank you for that. So hopefully we'll all be working, and Tango Shalom will indeed be in Cineplex Odeon Cinemas in September or October. Fingers crossed for a great turnout. My question has to do with the recently released Dune trailer. At first, I was dubious to the fact that the second part was not shot simultaneously. However, do you think the success of the first film could lead to the second part being divided into a part 1 and part 2? After watching the new trailer, this feels like it should be the next big trilogy. While I'm sad you aren't working on the special features for Dune Part 2 or 3, I'm super excited for them to be released. Well, Nathan, here's the thing. No, I don't think they would be split into parts 1 and part 2. I think we would get the second half of the first Dune, and then we would get Dune Messiah, where you'd watch, how many billions of people die over what happens with what happens with Paul Atreides. So that's what I think. I think they would be Dune, Dune Prophet, and Dune Messiah. That's kind of what I think they would do. I mean, yeah. Something like that. We shall see. We shall see. Anyway, let's see what you guys are saying. I don't know what you guys are saying. I have no idea. So let's see. Let's go over to you now. And where are we? We start with Willow. Willow says, if you had $30 million as the internet claims you do. What? The internet claims I have $30 million? Would you finance your next film, get a seat on board Jeff Bezos' rocket, or buy a bunch of hot toys? Well, I'd probably do all three. No, I would not buy a seat. I'd love to buy a house, like Elizabeth wants to buy a house, and the house she found, a beautiful house here in California. The house she wants, it's a great house. About $1.5 million to get the house and remodel it the way we do it. I'd buy a house. I would not buy a rocket. I'd buy a bunch of hot toys, which the hot toys I want, and all the toys I want in my life, I would probably spend $100,000 and I'd never have to buy more toys, except new ones as they came out. So what is that? That's 1.6 million. Then I would take I'd probably take $5 million and put it away in mutual funds and stocks, I think. Then I would take money and I'd redo Free Enterprise, not remake it, but I would redo it in 4K, so that was done and future-proofed. And then I would probably, how much do I have left? 30 million. So I've really only spent, I haven't even spent $2 million. Oh no, I put away the 5 million. So let's say I've spent 7 million. I put 5 million away, mutual funds and stuff like that, and I've bought my house. So I've spent 7 million. So I now have 23 million. I would probably take $1 million for Elizabeth's kids each. So Sophie and Zoe would get, I'd put $1 million away in trust for them each. And they would get it when they were 30. And they would have to meet certain conditions before they would get it. Hopefully it would have made more money by then. I would put money away for Elizabeth, probably a lot more money, maybe another 5 million away for her, just to have, maybe call it a retirement fund if she needed it. So what is that? That's another 7 million. So now I'm down 14 million of my 30. So what do I have left? I've got 16 million left. I'd probably make sure that my sister and her kids were taken care of as well. Maybe her 2 sons would also get $1 million and put away, of course, same deal. So then I'm up to, I've spent 16 million. Then my sister herself, her and her husband would get some money to take care of themselves. Probably, I'll give them 4. So I'm left with $10 million. If I had $10 million left, I'd make 3 $2.5 million films. I would direct one, and I have 2 of my. I would direct one. Charlie De Lauzarica would direct one, and Darren Scott or Dave Parker would direct one, and then I'd have the other $2.5 million in contingency and to spend on marketing. So there you go. That's what I would do. I would not go into space. Hopefully, then we'd make more movies, and I'd have enough money where I could go into space. But that's what I would do with my $30 million, off the top of my head. Mexican Iron Man sends in a super chat, and just sent in a super chat. Well, thank you, Mexican Iron Man. Mike, that was very much appreciated. Stubble McShave says, the spice in Dune is one of the best world-building elements ever created in speculative fiction. It's connected to wealth, political power, space travel, religion, and much more. You, sir, are correct. I agree. I mean, I think that's the spice melange is one of the great things in the world that I've seen. It is an incredible device for what you just said. It means all of those things, and it's great because of it. And I got to tell you, one of the coolest things about the Dune trailer is seeing the spice blowing amidst the sand, the crystalline. Both Zephyr Chan and were talking about that last night. I didn't quite know what they meant until I saw the trailer today, and they are both correct. Now, Stubble asks me something else here, and I'm going to take a look at it. Come on now. Does everybody see dicks in all the spaceships? Stubble says, have you seen the 10th anniversary edition of Leviathan Wakes, which is the first Expanse book? It certainly makes a statement with its new look. I think it's a bit too extreme for my bookcase. Now, the Rocinante, I understand what they're doing. Come on now. It does kind of look like a penis with stingers on the front of it. It's very Cronenbergian, but it's pretty cool. I actually kind of like that. The special edition comes out in September September this year. But yeah, it's kind of funny. Dick. It's very Reservoir Dogs. The whole world, the privatization of space is all about dicks. Tornderwatt Studio sends in a super chat and says, I hope Dune does well, but Blade Runner 2049 bombed because people wanted action and didn't like the contemplative nature of the film. Dune may suffer. Well, Dune has more action, but Dune is also contemplative. I think that the problem with Blade Runner 2049 was they expected it to be a hit because of why? I don't know. Everybody thinks that everybody in the film business reveres Blade Runner, but people outside of the film business are like, oh, that was that boring Harrison Ford movie that came out after Raiders of the Lost Ark. I love Blade Runner, but, what are you going to do? 200-Watt Studio goes on to say, do you think Dune will have a Hayden Christensen cameo where he's a spice miner on Arrakis? Arrakis. Dune picks up a handful of sand. I love it here. Come on now. No, I don't think that's going to happen. But I'm sure that's why George Lucas wrote that horrible line. Anti-Derivative Jill, I already mentioned she sent in a super chat sticker. I want to thank you for that, but I just want to say Anti-Derivative Jill. I wonder if she applies being anti-derivative into all walks of her life or all parts of her life, because that could be really interesting. Matt Guillemette, is it Guillemette? Safe to say Dune will be 10 times better than J.J. Abrams' Star Wars. It already is infinitely better than J.J. Abrams' Star Wars, and that is no slight to our earlier viewer who wrote in such a lovely letter. Also, Oscar Isaac should have had that epic beard in Star Wars. Yes, he should have. Can't wait to see him in Moon Knight and as Solid Snake. Look, man, Oscar Isaac, I'm telling you, he's going to kill it. He's going to kill it. I can't wait. I love Oscar Isaac, man. I've loved him in almost everything. I loved him in Ex Machina. I especially loved him in Inside Llewyn Davis, the Coen Brothers film. I think he's great. And I'll tell you, A Most Violent Year crushed. Oscar Isaac crushed. So check that out. The lovely Emma Bannon sends in a tip and says, why do you think people have such intense reactions to characters being recast? A black Superman or a female Doctor Who? No one blinks an eye when Shakespeare characters are played by a huge variety of people. Ian McKellen is playing an 80-year-old Hamlet. Look, I think when you have children, when you become fans of something as children, and they're so defined in your mind that when somebody wants to change them in some way, you get a little defensive about it. And I think that that's only natural. I totally get it. And like with Shakespeare, all the women used to be played by men anyway at the Globe Theater. So, but I think people just get, and also there is a racial connotation. I mean, let's face it, in this country we have a long history of being racist, and I think a lot of us, in a way, still are. Now, that doesn't mean I believe in critical race theory, because critical race theory is racist against other minority groups. So, anyway, but I think, having a black Superman, people immediately recoil. Not everybody, but some people do, because the connotation that certain people have is, what does it mean to be black? And are you making some kind of a statement that is going to stop Superman from being about truth, justice, the American way? I don't know. I don't get it. I mean, to me, when it comes to having a black Superman, the question always is, in my mind, well, is his being black going to affect the character in some way? Because I think it should. I think if you're Superman and you're Kal-El from Krypton, and say people are just darker skinned on Krypton because the sun was bigger, and just like on our planet, people genetically they have black skin and the features they have because it protected them from the sun. Well, if that was the case on Krypton, totally great explanation, totally believe that. But what happens if Superman lands in a racist state or Jim Crow era the South? What if Jonathan Ma Kent or Pa Kent and Jonathan? What about Martha Kent and Pa Kent or Jonathan Kent? They're living in the South during the Jim Crow era, and Superman shows up in their field. Suddenly, the fact that Superman's black is going to have added resonance. And I'm like, that could be really interesting. Like, I would watch that. Like, what happens when Superman, how do you lead your life when you actually are watching, you find out you're an alien with all these powers, and you have to live in the Jim Crow South during, say, the 50s and 60s? How do you respond to that? I think that's really interesting. And how does your parents, and what if your parents are like white people, but they take you in anyway because they see you as a miracle from heaven? I mean, there's interesting stuff to be mined there. And I would not be adverse to see something like that, but I think people freak out. But my question is, if you're going to do a race swap in this day and age, I think the question would be, well, what are you going to do with that race swap? If you're going to do it, make it interesting, make it count. And I don't have a problem with it, but I think people feel that it's going to turn into something that it isn't. Like, people want to watch, they want to see a great Superman story, and if you know it's who Superman is, do you want the idea that he's black and you're going to delve into racial issues? Does that supersede the Superman story that you want to get? And I think that that's what people get afraid of. I mean, I don't give a shit if characters are gender swapped. Just tell me a good story. The problem that I think that was really unfortunate about Jodie Whittaker as Doctor Who is those stories sucked. I tried to dip into that. I kept waiting like, what the fuck? Why are you writing this character this way? I mean, come on, give me. There are men that know how to write great women characters, and there are women that know how to write great men characters. But I don't think Doctor Who was well served or particularly well written female character, whoever worked on it. And I think that's kind of lame. The Phantasmagorium Show says, hey, Rob, thanks for being a guest on the Phantasmagorium Show today. We really appreciate it. That was fun. Talking Dune with you was a blast. It was a blast. I really enjoyed it. Alexander Wilson, our friend Alexander, who always has something interesting to say, which I always appreciate. AT&T earnings came out today, says Alexander, and HBO Max's subscriber numbers were very good. They're on pace to exceed their subscribers' 2020 projection. Say whatever you say, but Jason Killar's strategy worked. The bottom line shows that. You know what I like? The proof is in the pudding. I like that. And you know what? Look, I still believe in preserving the theatrical experience. I explained this earlier today on the Phantasmagorium Show, but I will always believe that you can watch things at home. That's fine. You'll be able to follow the story and everything, but I do believe that I know for me personally, When I go see a movie in a theater, the way my brain works, the experience of the movie itself, everything it has to offer, from the filmmaking to the story to the music, when I'm in a theater, the world ceases to exist, and all that I concentrate on is the film itself. When you're at home, even if you've got the greatest home theater system, you get a phone call, you look up, your mind is not as engaged. And I find that when I go see a movie in the theater, my mind's eye, I remember everything. I don't remember everything when I see it on video. Like when we do whining about movies and I haven't seen the movie before, or I haven't seen it in a long time and I watch it again on disc, I find that I don't retain it as much. I see a movie in the theater, I retain it. And I don't like that. So Jason Killar's strategy worked, but I think we are diminished as people by not seeing movies like Dune. I actually believe any movie, low budget, big budget, whatever, every movie is helped if you see it in a decent theater. Even Human Faces, which we are immediately attracted to, seeing a human face on a giant screen gives you more insight into the human experience than if you're watching it on a TV screen, where basically they're the same size as you, depending on how I mean, at least if you have a 70-inch TV. I just think going to the movies is a much better way to go. But yes, Jason Killar's strategy worked, Alexander. Then there's no denying that it worked. The problem is it worked for subscribers, but what about the earnings of those movies? It might have worked for HBO Max, but does Warner Brothers feel good about it? I mean, they might feel good about King Kong versus Godzilla, but what about a movie like The Little Things? How about that? The Denzel Washington, Jared Leto, Rami Malek movie. Are they cool with that? I don't know. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, kind souls, gentle beings, however you identify across the 28 known galaxies, well, you're welcome here. And I want to thank you for being here. This brings to an end Robservations episode number 724. Oh my God, how stoked are we about Dune? Very stoked. So I'm very stoked. I'm very happy to celebrate it tonight. Celebrate Dune tonight. I haven't quite decided if there's a midnighter. It depends how busy I get. The midnighters have been pretty good this week, so I like that. So these shows, what a bumper crop of letters. Thank you for all the heartfelt letters. If you want to write me a letter, you can do that. You can write me a letter at the Burnettwork.net website. It's free of charge. You do not have to spend any money, but please put in the heading. Do you want it to go to Let's Get Physical Media? Do you want it to go to Midnighter? Do you want it to go to Midnight Metal? Or do you want it to come to Robservations? Just say that. And I would assume if you send me a letter that you want me to read it. If you don't, please state that it's either personal or private and not to read it on the air. Otherwise, I will assume that you will. Go to the website. Usually the letters I read wind up on the website and you can read them. We have letter writers like Omar94 and, of course, Willow Yang. And Willow Yang, you should always read her letters. She has her own section on the website, Willow Talk, which is good. And I want to thank everybody for supporting the channel via Super Chats and tips. That goes a long way towards keeping this channel going. So thank you for that. And last but not least, I would like to thank my Blue Wrenches, my moderators. Is here. Purple Valkyrie is here. Love that voice, Purple Valkyrie. You can never go wrong listening to the dulcet tones of Purple Valkyrie. Louise X Sparrow. I mean, come on, man. Look at that. I have a great collection of female moderators on this channel, and I feel very fortunate to have them. So thank you all for being here. I guess I should say ladies. I don't know who else is here, but I want to thank you. I can't see anybody else, but if I missed you, that doesn't mean I don't love you. So thank you to the Blue Wrenches. I have to be careful when I'm talking about my female moderators. I don't want to misspeak and say that wrenches are something else, because that would be bad, even though I used to say that when I would go to medieval times. But anyway, thank you for moderating. Thanks for being the people that you are. And most of all, thanks for you, viewers. Thanks for the Post-Geek Singularity and all of that, because this is the best audience on YouTube. And remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. And I guess I should say like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. This channel will march ever forward. So thank you very much. And as always, have a better day.